When my older brother Marcus sent me a text message reading that he and his wife were boarding their flight to Cabo and had put their 3 children in an Uber, heading to my place, he expected me to panic. He expected me to drop everything in my life, open my front door, and blindly accept the heavy burden he was forcing onto me. For 32 years, that was my assigned role in this family. The obedient, quiet, single sister who existed only to serve their needs. Marcus thought I would just bow my head and obey. He thought he could dump his kids on my doorstep like unwanted luggage and fly off to a luxury vacation without a single consequence. But Marcus did not know one crucial detail. I had sold that house 3 months ago. The person opening the door to his children would not be their dutiful aunt. It would be a complete stranger. And that stranger was going to make a single phone call that would unleash a nightmare my brother never saw coming. Before I dive into the chaos that followed and how I brought my toxic family to their knees, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off entitled family members who treated you like a doormat. My name is Nia. I am 32 years old, and for my entire life, my family saw me as the unremarkable daughter who faded into the background. In their eyes, I was just a low-level real estate appraiser struggling to get by in Atlanta. To them, I was a tragic spinster with no husband, no children, and no real life of my own. They treated me like a free babysitter, an unpaid therapist, and a walking automatic teller machine whenever they needed a quick financial bailout. Growing up, I was taught that family is absolutely everything. We were expected to stick together, support each other, and never question the hierarchy. But in my family, that hierarchy was a ruthless dictatorship. My father was a respected pastor, and my mother was the ultimate church matriarch. They cared about 2 things above all else: social status and public appearances. Marcus was their undisputed golden child. He was a corporate sales director who married a white woman from a wealthy family, giving my parents the exact kind of prestigious, successful image they craved. Because I was just the quiet, natural-haired daughter who preferred reading financial reports over networking at church events, they decided early on that my time, my money, and my boundaries simply did not matter. If Marcus needed to borrow my car, my parents demanded I hand over the keys without complaint. If he maxed out his credit cards trying to keep up with his wife Chloe and her expensive tastes, I was expected to empty my modest savings to save him from embarrassment. They conditioned me to believe my role was to be the eternal safety net. If I dared to establish a boundary, I was labeled selfish. If I politely declined to attend a family event because of my demanding workload, I was accused of thinking I was better than them. The mental gymnastics required to survive in that toxic environment took a massive toll on my emotional health. For years, I believed their narrative. I believed I was meant to be small. But they had absolutely no idea who I really was. Behind their backs and far away from their judging eyes, I had built a massive commercial real estate portfolio. I was a multi-millionaire living a completely separate life. I managed luxury properties across the state, commanding boardrooms and closing multi-million-dollar deals. I owned shopping centers, apartment complexes, and lucrative office buildings. I hid my wealth deliberately to protect myself from the very people who should have loved me unconditionally. I knew exactly what would happen if my parents or my brother ever found out about my money. They would bleed me dry. They would demand I fund their extravagant lifestyles, pay off their mounting debts, and finance every reckless decision Marcus ever made. They would call it my duty as a daughter and a sister. So I played the part they assigned me. I drove an average car. I kept the old, outdated suburban house they thought I still lived in. I let them call me a failure because their insults were the perfect camouflage for my massive success. The house Marcus sent that Uber to was the very first property I ever bought. To my family, it was proof of my stagnant, boring life. They loved visiting just to point out the creaky floorboards and the outdated kitchen cabinets. They loved comparing it to Marcus and his sprawling, heavily mortgaged mansion. What they did not know was that I had deliberately kept that house looking modest as my ultimate decoy. 3 months ago, a massive development firm offered me a premium price for that land. I sold it, packed my bags, and moved into a breathtaking luxury penthouse in the heart of the city, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline. I did not tell a single soul in my family. I knew I needed to quietly cut the cord before they dragged me down with their inevitable financial collapse. I was ready to fade out of their lives completely and leave them to their own devices. But Marcus could not let me just walk away. His sheer entitlement forced my hand. He pushed me into a corner, expecting me to cower and accommodate his ridiculous demands. Instead, he handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy the illusion he had built, setting the stage for a reckoning that would shatter our family forever. The catalyst for his unhinged decision happened exactly 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Sunday dinner at my parents' house was an absolute institution. It was a mandatory weekly performance where my father, Pastor Silas, held court at the head of a massive oak table, and my mother, Mama Denise, served judgment alongside her famous roasted turkey and collard greens. To the congregation, they were the pillars of the community. But inside those dining room walls, the environment was a toxic hierarchy designed to elevate my brother and keep me firmly beneath his designer shoes. That particular Sunday, Marcus and his wife Chloe arrived nearly an hour late. They burst through the front door in a flurry of chaos, their 3 children running wild while Chloe loudly complained about the traffic, her exhaustion, and the incompetence of her latest housekeeper. Chloe was a white woman from a wealthy family who treated her marriage to my brother like a charity project. She viewed our family gatherings as an unfortunate chore, and my parents bent over backward to accommodate her every whim, desperate to maintain proximity to her family's social status. I was quietly setting the table, arranging the silverware just the way Mama Denise demanded when the dinner officially transitioned into what I always dreaded most: the assignment meeting. Whenever Marcus and Chloe needed something, they did not ask. They simply issued directives under the guise of family duty, fully backed by the authority of my parents. Marcus tapped his heavy silver fork against his crystal water glass, demanding the table's attention. He puffed out his chest, wearing a custom suit I knew for a fact he had purchased using a maxed-out credit card. "Chloe and I have had an incredibly stressful quarter," Marcus announced, wrapping an arm around his wife's shoulders. "Her family has generously offered us their timeshare in Cabo. We are taking a much-needed 2-week vacation to decompress and reconnect. We fly out next Friday at noon." Mama Denise immediately clapped her hands together, beaming with absolute pride. "Oh, praise the Lord. You two work so incredibly hard. Marcus, as a senior director, you carry the weight of that entire company on your back. And Chloe, sweetheart, you simply must get some sun. You deserve to be pampered." I kept my eyes on my plate, cutting a piece of cornbread, fully expecting what was coming next. The other shoe was about to drop. Marcus turned his gaze directly toward me. His tone shifted from boasting to authoritative. "Nia, you will need to pick the kids up from their private school on Friday. Make sure you have car seats installed. We will leave their packed suitcases on the porch so you do not track dirt into our house. We land back in Atlanta 2 weeks from Sunday, so you will bring them home by 5 in the evening. Make sure their homework is done." He did not ask if I was available. He did not ask if I had the financial means to feed 3 growing children for 14 days. He simply handed down an order, expecting me to fall into line like an unpaid employee. I stopped chewing. I placed my fork down on the porcelain plate, the faint clink echoing in the sudden quiet of the room. I looked my brother straight in the eyes. "I cannot do that, Marcus. I have a massive commercial merger to finalize at work, and my schedule is packed. I do not have the time or the energy to watch a 4-year-old, a 7-year-old, and a 9-year-old for 2 solid weeks. Find another babysitter." The entire dining room went dead silent. You would have thought I had just stood up and cursed in the middle of my father's Sunday sermon. Pastor Silas lowered his glass, his thick eyebrows knitting together in deep disapproval. Mama Denise let out a sharp gasp, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. But it was Chloe who broke the silence. She let out a loud, grating laugh, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms. She looked me up and down, her eyes dripping with absolute contempt. A corporate merger, she sneered, her voice dripping with venom. Nia, please. Do not try to make yourself sound important. You appraise old cheap houses in the suburbs. You are practically a glorified secretary. I felt my jaw clench, but I maintained my perfectly neutral expression. I let her dig her own grave. Chloe leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, weaponizing my personal life with brutal precision. Let us be entirely honest here. You do not have a husband. You do not have children. You live alone in that depressing little starter home. What exactly are you doing with your abundant free time that is so incredibly important? You should be down on your knees feeling grateful that we are allowing you to spend time with our children. It is the absolute closest thing you will ever get to having a real family of your own. Since no man is ever going to put a ring on your finger, the least you can do is make yourself useful to the people who actually have a life. The cruelty of her words hung heavily in the air. I looked toward my parents, waiting for them to correct her, waiting for them to defend their own daughter against this blatant racist disrespect. But they said absolutely nothing. In fact, Mama Denise glared at me, fully validating Chloe's vicious attack. Chloe is right, Nia, my mother scolded, her voice sharp and unforgiving. You are acting incredibly selfish. Your brother provides for his family. He carries the prestige of this household. Chloe comes from a prominent background and she needs her rest. You are a single woman with zero responsibilities. Family steps up when family needs help. I will not have you ruining your brother's vacation because you want to sit at home alone and feel sorry for yourself. Pastor Silas chimed in, using his booming preacher voice to intimidate me. The Lord teaches us to serve, Nia. Pride comes before the fall. You will take your nieces and nephew and you will do it with a glad heart. Do not make me repeat myself. For 32 years, I had surrendered to this exact dynamic. I had swallowed my pride, handed over my time, and let them use me as a stepping stone so Marcus could touch the sky. I had allowed them to insult my career, mock my single status, and treat me like a second-class citizen in my own family. They were absolutely convinced I was a failure who desperately needed their inclusion just to feel relevant. But as I sat there looking at Marcus' smug smile and Chloe's victorious smirk, I felt a profound, chilling clarity. I did not need to scream. I did not need to cry or throw my plate across the room. I had built an empire from the ground up. I held more power, more wealth, and more influence in a single bank account than Marcus and his wealthy in-laws combined. I was done shrinking myself to make them feel big. I picked up my linen napkin, wiped my mouth, and placed it neatly beside my plate. I looked directly at Chloe, then at Marcus, and finally at my parents. No, just one syllable. Clean, sharp, and absolutely final. Excuse me, my father thundered, half rising from his chair. What did you just say to me? I said no. I am not taking your children. I am not your babysitter. I am not your servant. And I am absolutely done allowing this family to speak to me like I am garbage. If you want a nanny for your Cabo trip, I suggest you use that senior director salary to hire one, because I will not be opening my door. I pushed my chair back, the wooden legs scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. I reached into my designer handbag, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and dropped it right in the middle of Mama Denise's perfect centerpiece. That covers my portion of the meal, I said coldly. Enjoy your trip, Marcus. I turned my back on them and walked toward the front door. Behind me, the dining room erupted into absolute chaos. Mama Denise began shrieking about my disrespect, demanding I come back and apologize to Chloe. Marcus yelled that I was a bitter, jealous loser. Pastor Silas threatened that I would be banned from the church if I walked out that door. I did not stop. I did not turn around. I walked out into the cool evening air, got into my car, and drove away from their toxicity for the very last time. I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. But as I navigated the Atlanta traffic toward my real home, a luxury penthouse they knew nothing about, I knew my brother well enough to realize this was not over. Marcus had never accepted the word no in his entire life. His ego would not allow it. He genuinely believed that my boundaries were just a temporary tantrum, and that when push came to shove, I would submit to his authority. He was going to force my hand, and in doing so, he was about to set his own perfect life completely on fire. The very next morning, my phone began ringing before the sun even came up. I was sitting at the massive marble kitchen island of my penthouse, reviewing the final contracts for a multi-million-dollar retail acquisition, when Mama Denise's name flashed on my screen. I did not answer. I simply let it go to voicemail, just like I did with the 15 subsequent calls that followed over the next 48 hours. But my mother was relentless. She weaponized her voicemails, using the exact brand of religious guilt and cultural pressure she had perfected over decades as the First Lady of our church. Her voice would echo through my silent apartment, dripping with condescension and misplaced righteous fury. "Nia, you are acting like a petulant child," her voice hissed from the speaker. "Your brother is the pride of our congregation. Do you have any idea how hard he works to provide for Chloe and those children?" Chloe comes from a highly respected family. They are accustomed to a certain standard of living, and they need this trip to Cabo to maintain their marital peace. You are a single woman. You have no husband to serve. You have no children to raise. You must learn to sacrifice for your brother. The Lord commands us to honor our family, and your defiance is a stain on your father's ministry. You will call Marcus, immediately apologize for your shameful outburst, and confirm that you are taking those children. She wielded our heritage and our faith like a weapon. As a woman in this family, your duty is to uplift the men she preached through the voicemail, her voice carrying the same theatrical cadence she used from the church pews. Your brother faces enough challenges in the corporate world. You do not abandon your own blood just because you are jealous of his successful marriage. You are embarrassing your lineage, Nia. You will fall in line or you will face the absolute wrath of God. It was the ultimate form of toxic manipulation, perfectly designed to make me feel small, ungrateful, and spiritually inadequate. I listened to her unhinged demands while sipping a fresh cup of artisan coffee, feeling absolutely nothing. In the past, a voicemail like that would have sent me into a dark spiral of anxiety. I would have folded, apologized, and bent over backward to regain their fragile conditional approval. But this time her words held zero power over me. I tapped the screen and permanently blocked my mother's number. Then I blocked Pastor Silas. Then I blocked Marcus and Chloe. With 4 simple taps, I completely severed the toxic umbilical cord that had choked me for my entire adult life. I had one final loose end to tie up before my emancipation was absolute. The old, outdated starter house in the suburbs. The very house my family loved to mock the one they firmly believed I was currently sitting in, sobbing over my lonely, pathetic existence. On Wednesday afternoon, 2 days before Marcus and Chloe were scheduled to fly to Mexico, I walked into the sleek glass-enclosed offices of my real estate attorney. I was not wearing the drab, oversized sweaters my family was accustomed to seeing me in. I wore a tailored, plum-colored designer suit, carrying a briefcase that contained the closing documents for the sale of my property. My attorney, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah, slid the final paperwork across the polished mahogany desk. The buyer was already there, reviewing her copy of the deed. Her name was Helen Sterling. She was an imposing, impeccably dressed older woman with an aura of absolute authority. During our brief interactions leading up to the sale, I had learned that she was a high-ranking state official who had specifically chosen my old house because it sat at the end of a quiet, secluded cul-de-sac. She valued her peace and quiet above all else, having recently relocated from the chaotic city center to escape the noise and drama of her demanding career. She had zero tolerance for neighborhood drama, unannounced visitors, or anything that disrupted her highly regimented schedule. We exchanged pleasantries, and I picked up my customized gold pen. With a few swift signatures, I officially transferred the ownership of the property. The house was no longer mine. My name was scrubbed from the deed, the utilities were transferred, and the keys were handed over to Helen Sterling. The transaction was clean, legal, and absolute. "I hope you enjoy the neighborhood, Helen," I said, shaking her hand firmly. "It is usually very quiet." "That is exactly what I'm counting on, Nia," she replied with a polite, tight-lipped smile. "I do not tolerate disturbances." If only she knew what was coming to her front porch in exactly 48 hours. I walked out of that law firm feeling lighter than air. The substantial wire transfer had already hit my private offshore account, adding to the millions I had successfully accumulated under my family's radar. I got into my luxury SUV, a vehicle I parked in a secured underground garage far away from anyone who might recognize me, and drove back to my penthouse. I had done it. I was officially a ghost. My family had absolutely no way of reaching me, no idea where I actually lived, and no legal connection to the property they intended to dump their children at. Thursday evening, the night before their trip, I poured myself a glass of expensive red wine and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my living room, looking out over the glittering Atlanta skyline. I knew exactly how Marcus operated. He was a creature of immense arrogance. In his mind, my silence over the past few days was not a sign of defiance. It was a sign of submission. He genuinely believed I was sitting in that old house pouting but ultimately preparing to receive his kids. He was so accustomed to steamrolling over my boundaries that the concept of me actually standing my ground was utterly incomprehensible to him. He would not bother to verify if I was home. He would not ask for confirmation. He and Chloe would simply pack their designer luggage, dress the kids in their travel clothes, and call a premium rideshare service. They would input my old address, wave goodbye to their offspring, and head straight to the airport VIP lounge, fully confident that the lowly, obedient sister would handle their responsibilities. They were going to commit a catastrophic mistake, and I was not going to lift a single finger to stop them. I took a sip of my wine, the rich, complex flavor settling warmly in my chest. For the first time in my life, I was not protecting my brother from the consequences of his own actions. I was stepping out of the way and letting the universe deliver the brutal justice he so desperately deserved. Friday morning arrived bright and crisp. It was the day of my massive corporate merger, the exact career milestone Chloe had mocked at the dinner table. I woke up at dawn, completely refreshed. I completed my morning workout, enjoyed a hot shower in my marble bathroom, and dressed in my sharpest power suit. My mind was entirely focused on the multi-million-dollar contracts waiting for my signature in a downtown high-rise boardroom. I did not spare a single thought for Marcus, Chloe, or their flight to Cabo. As I rode the private elevator down to the lobby, my phone remained completely silent, perfectly insulated by the block list I had curated earlier that week. I stepped out into the bustling city, breathing in the fresh, unfiltered air of absolute freedom. My ruthless decision was sealed. The trap was set. And miles away in the quiet suburbs, an entitled brother was about to toss his children into the back of an Uber, completely unaware that he was sending them straight to a high-ranking state official who would not hesitate to tear his entire world apart. Picture the scene on the other side of town that very same Friday morning. If there had been a camera capturing the chaos inside Marcus and Chloe's sprawling, heavily mortgaged suburban mansion, the footage would be a dizzying, fast-paced blur of sheer, unadulterated entitlement. The atmosphere was frantic, entirely focused on their own selfish desires, while their 3 children were treated like inconvenient background props. Chloe was furiously pacing the hardwood floors of their grand foyer, shouting into her phone at her travel agent because her first-class seating arrangement was not to her exact specifications. She wore a wide-brimmed designer sun hat and oversized sunglasses indoors, completely ignoring the fact that her 4-year-old son Leo was tugging at her silk trousers, asking for breakfast. Marcus was no better. He was frantically barking orders at his assistant over speakerphone while aggressively trying to zip a heavy leather garment bag stuffed with luxury resort wear. He checked his solid gold Rolex every 2 minutes, cursing under his breath about the Atlanta traffic. Not once did either of them stop to look at their children. 9-year-old Maya stood by the front door, nervously clutching her pink backpack and holding the hands of her younger brothers, 7-year-old Jamal and 4-year-old Leo. The children were quiet, deeply accustomed to the chaotic, self-absorbed tornado that was their parents. They had been hurriedly dressed in matching outfits that looked good for social media photos, but offered zero comfort for the reality of being shuffled around like burdensome cargo. Outside, a sleek black luxury SUV pulled into their wide circular driveway. Marcus had ordered an Uber Black. Not for himself and Chloe to travel to the airport in comfort, but to transport his 3 young children across the city entirely unescorted. He threw open the heavy wooden front door, grabbed the 3 small suitcases he had hastily packed for the kids, and marched down the steps. The driver, a middle-aged man in a neat suit, stepped out of the vehicle and popped the trunk, looking visibly confused when Marcus shoved the children's luggage inside. "Get in the back!" Marcus commanded, shooing his daughter toward the leather seats of the SUV. "Make sure your brothers buckle their seatbelts." The driver frowned, looking from the 3 young children climbing into his vehicle back to Marcus. "Sir, are you riding with them? Company policy requires an adult to accompany minors on the trip." Marcus did not even blink. He reached into his tailored suit jacket, pulled out a crisp $50 bill, and shoved it directly into the driver's shirt pocket. "I am a premium member, and I am in a massive hurry. They are going straight to my sister's house. It is a straight shot down the highway to a very safe suburban neighborhood. Her name is Nia. She will be waiting right on the porch when you pull up. Just drop them at the curb. Do not make this a bigger deal than it needs to be." He handed Maya a crumpled sticky note with my old address scribbled on it. "When the car stops, you walk up to the door and ring the bell. Aunt Nia is going to take care of you. Do not cause her any trouble and do not call me. Mommy and Daddy need a break." Maya nodded nervously, her small arms wrapping protectively around little Leo. Marcus slammed the heavy car door shut, without a single hug, kiss, or word of affection. He tapped the roof of the SUV twice, signaling the driver to leave. As the black vehicle rolled out of the driveway, carrying his 3 vulnerable children away, Marcus did not watch them go. He immediately turned his back, pulling out his phone to check the status of his own private airport transfer. Inside the house, Chloe was reapplying her expensive lipstick in the hallway mirror. "Are they gone?" she asked, casually popping her lips. Marcus nodded, checking his reflection next to hers. "On their way." The driver was a little hesitant, but money talks. "They will be at Nia's house in 45 minutes. Chloe laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Did you even call her to tell her they were coming? She was throwing such a ridiculous temper tantrum at dinner on Sunday. You know how she gets when she tries to pretend she has boundaries." Marcus scoffed, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "Why would I call her? If I call her, it gives her the illusion that this is a negotiation. It gives her the opportunity to argue. You know exactly how my parents raised her. Nia is all bark and absolutely no bite. She is a lonely, bitter spinster who just wants attention." The second that Uber pulls up and she sees her precious nieces and nephews standing on her porch, she is going to fold like a cheap folding chair. She will open the door, take them inside, and do exactly what she is told. She always does. Chloe smiled, linking her arm through his. "You are right. She is probably sitting in that depressing, outdated kitchen right now, just waiting for the doorbell to ring so she can feel useful. God, I cannot imagine living such a pathetic life." Their private car arrived 10 minutes later, whisking them away to Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. They breezed through the priority security lanes, flashing their premium status, and headed straight for the exclusive Delta Sky Club lounge. For the next hour, they sat in plush leather chairs, sipping expensive mimosas and eating complimentary smoked salmon. They took smiling selfies, posting them to their social media accounts, with hashtags about well-deserved rest power couples and luxury travel. Their followers flooded the comment sections, with praise validating the hollow manufactured image they worked so desperately to project. As they finished their drinks and prepared to walk toward their first-class boarding gate, Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket. He looked at the screen, noting that it had been exactly an hour and a half since the Uber left their driveway. There were no missed calls. There were no frantic text messages from me demanding to know why his kids were on my porch. "See," Marcus said, showing the blank screen to Chloe with an arrogant, victorious smirk. "Nothing. Total silence. I told you she would fall in line. She probably already has them unpacked and eating snacks. My parents trained her well. She knows better than to actually defy me." Chloe giggled, tossing her designer hair over her shoulder. "Perfect. Now turn that phone off. I do not want to hear a single notification, complaint, or question from her for the next 14 days. We are on vacation time now." Marcus gladly obliged. With a swift, confident swipe of his thumb, he powered down his smartphone. He slipped it into his jacket pocket, completely severing his only line of communication with the outside world. He grabbed his expensive carry-on bag, took his wife's hand, and strutted down the jet bridge. In his mind, he had won. He had successfully exerted his dominance, crushed my pathetic attempt at establishing a boundary, and secured 2 weeks of uninterrupted, sun-soaked luxury. He sat back in his spacious first-class seat, accepted a warm towel from the flight attendant, and closed his eyes as the plane began to taxi down the runway. He was the undisputed king of his world, untouchable, successful, and perfectly in control. He was so deeply blinded by his own towering narcissism that he could not see the monumental catastrophe he had just initiated. He truly believed he had sent his children to the safe, familiar doorstep of his submissive sister. He had absolutely no idea that the address written on that crumpled sticky note no longer belonged to me. He had no idea that his 3 terrified children were currently standing on the porch of a stranger. And he certainly had no idea that by turning off his phone and flying out of the country, he had just handed the state all the evidence they needed to charge him with a devastating felony. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had locked him inside, and he threw away the key himself. The journey from their massive suburban mansion to my old neighborhood took nearly 45 minutes. The driver navigated the quiet, winding streets of the subdivision, finally bringing the heavy luxury SUV to a stop in front of the familiar 2-story brick house. The autumn air in Atlanta had been deceptively mild that morning, but as the afternoon approached, a harsh, biting cold front began rolling in from the north. The wind whipped through the bare branches of the oak trees lining the cul-de-sac. The driver put the car in park, stepped out, and quickly unloaded the 3 small suitcases onto the concrete driveway. He did not walk the children to the door. He did not wait to ensure an adult was home. He simply opened the back doors, ushered Maya, Jamal, and little Leo out onto the pavement, and sped away the moment his wheels hit the asphalt. Maya stood shivering on the driveway, gripping her pink backpack tightly with one hand and holding 4-year-old Leo's fingers with the other. Jamal huddled close to his older sister, pulling his thin designer jacket tightly around his chest. The clothes Chloe had selected for them were entirely meant for aesthetics, not for standing outside in the dropping November temperatures. The 3 children slowly made their way up the concrete walkway toward the front porch. Maya looked up at the heavy wooden door. It was the same door she had walked through during family gatherings the previous year, but the porch looked different. The potted plants I used to keep were gone. The welcome mat was unfamiliar. Still, Maya did exactly as she was told. She reached up with a trembling hand and pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed deep within the quiet house. Maya held her breath, waiting for her Aunt Nia to open the door, waiting for the familiar face that would invite them inside out of the biting wind. The children huddled together on the welcome mat, their small shoulders shaking as the cold seeped through their light clothing. Seconds ticked by, stretching into agonizing minutes. Little Leo began to whimper, burying his face against Maya's leg. She hushed him gently, holding up the crumpled sticky note her father had shoved into her hand, gripping it like a lifeline. Finally, they heard the heavy sound of a deadbolt turning. The brass handle clicked, and the heavy door swung inward. But the person standing on the other side of the threshold was not their Aunt Nia. If you could look over Maya's small shoulder in that exact moment, you would see a woman who commanded instant respect. Helen Sterling stood in the doorway, framed by the warm, immaculate interior of her newly purchased home. Helen was a woman in her late 50s with striking silver hair pulled into a severe, elegant twist. She wore wire-rimmed reading glasses resting on the bridge of her nose, a tailored cashmere cardigan, and an expression of absolute, unfiltered bewilderment. She had moved to this quiet suburban street specifically to escape the relentless, grueling noise of her daily life. She was expecting a peaceful afternoon reviewing case files by her fireplace. She was certainly not expecting to find 3 freezing, terrified children abandoned on her front porch. Helen looked down at the shivering trio, her sharp eyes scanning their inadequate clothing, their luggage sitting haphazardly on the pavement behind them, and the complete absence of any adult supervision in her driveway. Her bewilderment rapidly transformed into acute, highly trained concern. "Hello," Helen said, her voice firm, but laced with a gentle, cautious warmth. "Are you children lost? Where are your parents?" Maya looked up at the towering woman, her bottom lip trembling. The 9-year-old was trying desperately to be brave for her younger brothers, but the confusion was breaking her down. "Are you Aunt Nia's friend?" Maya asked, her voice cracking in the cold wind. "My daddy said Aunt Nia lives here. He said she was waiting for us." Helen frowned, the confusion deepening the lines around her eyes. She stepped back, opening the door wider to let the heat from the house spill out onto the freezing children. "Nia does not live here anymore, sweetheart. I bought this house from her 3 months ago. My name is Helen. Who dropped you off here?" "An Uber driver." Jamal answered softly, his teeth beginning to chatter. "Daddy paid him to leave us here." Helen froze. The words hung in the frigid air, defying all logic and reason. "An Uber driver. Daddy paid him." Helen's highly analytical mind began to race, piecing together the fragmented information. She looked at the crumpled piece of paper in Maya's hand. "May I see that note, sweetheart?" Maya handed the sticky note over. Helen adjusted her glasses and read Marcus' sloppy, arrogant handwriting. It contained my old address and a single instruction to leave the kids at the door. There was no contact number, no emergency information, no context whatsoever. It was the absolute textbook definition of gross parental negligence. "Where are your parents right now?" Helen asked, her tone shifting. The gentle caution was instantly replaced by a razor-sharp, authoritative precision. She stepped forward, ushering the children out of the biting wind and into the warmth of her foyer, pulling their small suitcases inside behind them. "They went to the airport," Maya explained, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes as the warmth of the house hit her freezing face. "They are going on a vacation to the beach. Daddy said we had to stay here with Aunt Nia for 2 weeks. He said we were not allowed to call him because Mommy needed a break." The air in the grand foyer seemed to completely solidify. Helen Sterling stood absolutely motionless, staring down at the 3 children whose parents had just treated them like unwanted disposable parcels. What Marcus and Chloe did not know, what they could not possibly have fathomed in their wildest, most arrogant dreams, was the true identity of the woman standing in my old foyer. Helen Sterling was not just a retired grandmother seeking suburban peace. She was not a civilian who would simply feel sorry for the children and try to track down a distant relative. Helen Sterling was the head commissioner of Child Protective Services for the entire state of Georgia. She was a woman of ironclad principles who had spent 30 years of her life fighting on the front lines of child neglect and abuse. She was the highest-ranking official in the state agency, responsible for removing children from dangerous environments. She wrote the very policies that put neglectful parents behind bars. She spent her days battling the darkest, most tragic failures of human parenting. She had purchased my house specifically to distance herself from the horrific reality of her daily docket. And Marcus, in his infinite, towering stupidity, had just delivered 3 abandoned children directly to the front door of the most powerful child welfare executive in the region. Helen looked at the 3 shivering children standing in her entryway. She saw their expensive, inadequate clothing. She saw the fear in Maya's eyes and the exhaustion in little Leo's face. The maternal instinct in her heart flared, but it was immediately overtaken by the cold, unyielding fury of a law enforcement professional witnessing a devastating crime firsthand. "Come into the kitchens, all of you," Helen instructed, guiding them away from the cold entryway. She helped them take off their thin jackets, wrapped them in thick plush throw blankets from her living room, and seated them at the large island counter. She poured them glasses of warm milk, ensuring their immediate physical safety before taking another step. "Maya, do you know your father's phone number?" Helen asked, pulling her personal cell phone from her cardigan pocket. Maya nodded, reciting Marcus' phone number from memory. Helen dialed the digits, holding the phone to her ear. The line rang once, twice, and then clicked directly to voicemail. Marcus' custom greeting played, his smooth, arrogant voice instructing the caller to leave a message. Helen ended the call and dialed Chloe's number, which Maya also provided. The exact same result, straight to a perfectly curated voicemail message. Marcus and Chloe were already 30,000 feet in the air, sipping complimentary champagne in first class, their phones powered off, completely disconnected from the earth and the children they left upon it. Helen placed her phone face down on the marble counter. She looked at the three children bundled in her blankets, drinking warm milk in a house that belonged to a total stranger. They had no idea that their parents had just committed a massive, unforgivable felony. But Helen knew. She knew the law inside and out. She knew that abandoning minors under the age of 10 at a residential address without confirming adult supervision was a severe criminal offense. It was not a misunderstanding. It was not a poor lapse in judgment. It was a crime punishable by immediate arrest and potential prison time. She did not reach out to try and find my new contact information. She did not attempt to locate Pastor Silas or Mama Denise through church directories. Helen Sterling operated strictly by the book, and the book demanded immediate, uncompromising intervention. She excused herself from the kitchen, walking into her private home office and closing the heavy oak door behind her. Marcus thought he was untouchable. He thought his wealth, his status, and his sheer entitlement shielded him from the consequences of reality. But as Helen Sterling picked up her phone and dialed a direct, unlisted number, Marcus's entire fake perfect universe was about to be violently ripped apart. The bomb he had carelessly tossed onto my old front porch had not simply fizzled out. It had landed directly in the hands of the one woman capable of ensuring it destroyed his life completely. Inside the quiet sanctuary of her home office, Helen Sterling did not waste a single second searching social media for my name. She did not scroll through local church directories trying to locate Pastor Silas or Mama Denise. To a veteran of the child welfare system, hunting down reluctant relatives to clean up a negligent parent's mess was not just inefficient, it was against standard operating procedure. A severe crime had been committed on her property. 3 vulnerable minors had been subjected to acute endangerment. The protocol was absolute, and Helen Sterling was not a woman who deviated from the rules. Helen picked up her desk phone and bypassed the standard emergency dispatch, dialing a direct line to the local police precinct commander, a man she had collaborated with on countless severe neglect cases. She reported the situation with the chilling clinical precision of a seasoned executive. 3 minors ages 4, 7, and 9. Abandoned at a residential address via a commercial rideshare service. Parents confirmed to be on an international flight to Mexico. No emergency contacts provided. No medical proxies. No adults present. Within 12 minutes, the flashing blue and red lights of 2 police cruisers reflected off the large windows of Helen's living room. Following closely behind them was an unmarked state vehicle carrying an emergency response team from Child Protective Services. In the kitchen, little Leo had finally succumbed to his exhaustion, his tears drying as he fell asleep, wrapped in the plush blanket on the couch. Jamal sat frozen, staring at the flashing lights outside while Maya began to hyperventilate. The 9-year-old was old enough to understand that police meant trouble. She clutched Helen's hand, begging and pleading, promising that she would be good, terrified that she was somehow responsible for the officers walking up to the front door. Helen knelt down to Maya's eye level, her voice firm but radiating maternal protection. She assured the young girl that she was not in trouble, that her parents had broken very serious rules meant to keep children safe, and that the officers were there to protect them. When the responding officers stepped into the foyer, their standard procedural demeanor completely evaporated the second they recognized the homeowner. "You do not patronize the head commissioner of Child Protective Services." They listened in stunned silence as Helen handed over the crumpled sticky note bearing my old address and recounted the children's statements. The lead officer, a seasoned sergeant, attempted to dial Marcus and Chloe's numbers one final time, putting his radio on speaker. The robotic voice of the voicemail greeting echoed in the foyer, sealing my brother's fate. The sergeant looked at Helen, his expression hardening. They crossed state lines and international borders while leaving dependent minors unattended without an assigned guardian. He stated, his pen pausing over his notepad. "This goes entirely beyond simple negligence, Commissioner." Helen crossed her arms, her posture unyielding. I am aware, Sergeant. I want charges filed immediately for felony child abandonment. I want a full investigation into the rideshare driver who left them on the curb, and I want the children processed into the emergency care system until a fully vetted, legally binding placement can be secured. Do not release them to any relatives who come looking until a judge signs off. These parents felt comfortable treating their offspring like disposable trash. The state will now treat them like criminals. The emergency social workers, practically shaking with nervous adrenaline at having to conduct a removal in front of their ultimate boss, gently gathered Maya, Jamal, and Leo. They packed up the thin designer suitcases Marcus had hastily thrown together. The children were loaded into the warm state vehicle and transported directly to a specialized emergency foster care facility, a safe, highly monitored environment designed for temporary placements. For the first time in their lives, Marcus and Chloe's children were absorbed into the state system, stripped of their privileged suburban bubble, all because their father refused to take no for an answer. While the children were being settled into a safe facility, the grinding, relentless machinery of the justice system roared to life. Back at the local precinct, detectives rapidly pulled the flight manifests from Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. They confirmed that Marcus and Chloe had indeed boarded a Delta flight bound for Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. The evidence was undeniable, irrefutable, and completely documented. Within 2 hours of the children arriving at Helen's doorstep, an emergency hearing was convened with a superior court judge. The judge reviewed the sticky note, the police report, and the sworn affidavit from the head commissioner herself. He did not hesitate. The judge signed 2 emergency arrest warrants for Marcus and Chloe. The charges were staggering: 3 counts each of felony child abandonment and reckless endangerment of a minor. But the justice system was not going to wait for them to finish getting their tans in Cabo. Because they had fled the country while committing a felony, the local police coordinated directly with federal authorities. Customs and Border Protection flagged their passports. Interpol liaisons at the destination airport were immediately notified. A massive, inescapable red alert was slapped onto their identities. My brother had spent his entire adult life believing that his tailored suits, his impressive job title, and his wealthy white wife made him completely untouchable. He believed that the rules did not apply to him, that he could simply throw his weight around and the world would bend to accommodate his desires. He thought he had outsmarted me. But the law does not care about your senior director status when you dump toddlers on a freezing porch. The law does not care about your country club memberships when you turn off your phone and fly to a luxury resort, leaving your flesh and blood to fend for themselves. Sitting in my penthouse across the city, I was completely oblivious to the legal storm that had just been unleashed. I was enjoying my evening celebrating the successful closing of my corporate merger with a rare, expensive steak and a glass of vintage bourbon. I felt completely at peace, reveling in the quiet boundary I had finally managed to enforce. I had no idea that my old address was currently wrapped in yellow police tape, or that my nieces and nephew were sleeping in a state facility. But Marcus was about to find out. His 2-week luxury escape, the vacation he had demanded I sacrifice my career to facilitate, was about to be violently cut short before he even had the chance to order his first margarita by the beach. The trap he had so arrogantly built for me had snapped shut on his own neck, and the jaws of the justice system were already locking tight. He was completely powerless, 30,000 feet in the air, hurtling toward a spectacular downfall that would permanently shatter the fake, perfect facade of our toxic family. The weekend passed in absolute undisturbed tranquility. While my brother was hurtling toward an international legal disaster, I spent my Saturday indulging in the kind of peace I had been denied for my entire life. I visited my favorite spa, enjoyed a deep tissue massage, and finalized the financial models for my newest commercial property acquisition. I slept soundly, wrapped in silk sheets, completely unbothered by the toxic weight of my family's expectations. But as the sun rose on Sunday morning, casting a brilliant golden glow over the Atlanta skyline, the reality of Marcus's staggering arrogance finally collided with the relentless machinery of the law. I was sitting in the center of my spacious living room, dressed in a comfortable cashmere robe, sipping a freshly brewed espresso. Soft jazz played through the surround sound speakers, If there was a camera capturing my exact movement, it would be slowly circling my chair, taking in the absolute serenity on my face, as a quiet, ironic smile touched my lips. Because at that exact moment on the other side of the city, the flawless, heavily curated illusion of my parents' perfect family was being violently ripped to shreds in front of an audience of thousands. Sunday morning at my father's megachurch was a highly orchestrated production. Pastor Silas and Mama Denise operated that congregation like a royal court, and they were the undisputed king and queen. The sanctuary held over 2,000 devout members of the community, all dressed in their Sunday best. My mother sat in the front row wearing an expensive tailored suit and an elaborate matching hat, soaking in the admiration and respect of the parishioners. She was the First Lady of the Church, a title she guarded with her life. She thrived on the illusion that her family was entirely blessed, untouchable, and superior to everyone else sitting in those pews. At exactly 11 o'clock, Pastor Silas stepped up to the grand wooden pulpit. The massive choir had just finished a soaring, emotional performance, leaving the congregation primed and attentive. My father adjusted his expensive lapel microphone and launched into a fiery, passionate sermon. The bitter irony of his chosen topic for that specific Sunday could not have been scripted any better. He was preaching about the sacred duty of family. He projected his booming voice across the cavernous room, lecturing the crowd about parental responsibility, the sanctity of the household, and the moral obligation to raise children with unwavering Christian values. He was at the absolute height of his performance, wiping sweat from his forehead as the congregation shouted their agreements. But behind the scenes in the administrative offices of the church, absolute panic had just erupted. The emergency contact number Marcus had listed on his children's school and medical files belonged to my father. When Helen Sterling and the police had processed Maya Jamal and little Leo into the emergency foster care system, the state immediately required a verified next of kin to take temporary legal responsibility. The police detectives had been trying to reach my parents' cell phones all morning, but Pastor Silas and Mama Denise strictly turned their personal devices off during Sunday service. Frustrated by the lack of response and bound by the strict legal timeline of a felony child abandonment case, the precinct commander dialed the church's main administrative landline. The head deacon answered the phone. The police did not mince words. They demanded to speak to Pastor Silas immediately regarding a severe life-threatening emergency involving his 3 grandchildren. Back in the sanctuary, my father was mid-sentence raising his hand toward the stained glass ceiling when the heavy oak doors at the side of the altar swung open. The head deacon, a man who normally guarded the sanctity of the service with his life, sprinted across the polished floor directly toward the pulpit. He was holding a cordless phone, his face drained of all color, his hands visibly shaking. The congregation fell silent. The sudden interruption was unprecedented. Pastor Silas lowered his hand, his expression flashing with intense irritation at being disturbed during his sermon. He covered the microphone with his palm, but in his frustration and confusion, he failed to mute the sensitive lapel mic clipped to his tie. "What is the meaning of this?" my father hissed, his voice echoing loudly through the massive speakers positioned around the sanctuary. The deacon handed him the phone, his voice trembling as he spoke into the live microphone. "Pastor, it is the Atlanta Police Department. They say it is an absolute emergency regarding Marcus and the children. They say Marcus has been arrested." A collective sharp gasp rippled through the 2,000 people sitting in the pews. Mama Denise bolted upright in the front row, her pristine posture completely collapsing as she gripped the wooden pew in front of her. My father snatched the phone, his face turning an angry shade of red as he pressed it to his ear. "This is Pastor Silas. What is going on?" The voice on the other end of the line was a senior detective, and because my father was standing directly next to the pulpit microphone, the detective's sharp, authoritative words bled into the church audio system, amplifying the devastating truth for every single person to hear. "Pastor, we are holding your 3 grandchildren in state custody. Your son Marcus and his wife Chloe are currently in the custody of international authorities in Cabo San Lucas. Warrants have been issued for their immediate extradition back to the United States. They are being charged with 3 counts of felony child abandonment and reckless endangerment of a minor. We need you down at the precinct immediately, or the children will remain in the emergency foster care system indefinitely. The silence that slammed into that sanctuary was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. The illusion did not just crack. It shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The golden child, the senior sales director, the ultimate pride of the church, had just been exposed as a criminal who threw his own children away to go on a beach vacation. Mama Denise let out a blood-curdling shriek, dropping her designer purse as she stumbled out of the pew. The whispers erupted immediately. 2,000 parishioners, the very people my parents had judged and looked down upon for decades, were now staring at them with unfiltered shock, horror, and judgment. The murmurs spread like wildfire across the enormous room. Felony, arrest warrants, abandonment, state custody. Every carefully curated lie my parents had told about their perfect, highly educated, flawless family evaporated in the span of 30 seconds. Pastor Silas dropped the cordless phone. It clattered against the wooden pulpit, the sound echoing like a gunshot. He did not say a closing prayer. He did not dismiss the congregation. He grabbed my mother by the arm, and the two of them practically ran down the side aisle, fleeing their own church in absolute, unprecedented disgrace. Their social currency, the only thing they valued more than life itself, was entirely bankrupt. As they sped away from the church toward the police precinct, panic consumed them completely. They tried frantically to call Marcus, but his phone was still powered off, seized by the authorities the moment he was detained at the Mexican border. They tried to call Chloe, but her phone was equally unresponsive. Their golden child was completely unreachable, locked in a nightmare entirely of his own making. Desperate, humiliated, and terrified of the impending media scandal, they turned their frantic attention to the only person left to blame: me. Sitting in my penthouse, I watched my business cell phone light up on the kitchen island. I had permanently blocked their personal numbers, but in their absolute desperation, my parents had convinced the church secretary to call me from the main office line. I recognized the number immediately. I did not reach for the phone. I did not silence the ringer. I simply sat back in my velvet chair, swirling the last drop of my espresso, and let the phone ring until it clicked over to voicemail. A few minutes later, the audio file popped up on my screen. I pressed play, the room filling with the hysterical, unhinged sounds of my mother losing her grip on reality. "Nia, pick up this phone right now." Mama Denise's voice was shrill, completely stripped of her usual composed religious tone. "What did you do? The police have the children. Marcus is being arrested. You were supposed to be watching them. Why did you not open your door? You are going to ruin this family. You need to drive to the police station right this second and tell them you made a mistake. Tell them you forgot to pick the kids up. Tell them Marcus is innocent. You cannot let your brother go to prison. Call me back immediately." I listened to the entire frantic, screaming message without moving a single muscle. The sheer audacity of her demands was breathtaking. Even now, while her precious son was facing international extradition for a crime he undeniably committed, she expected me to fall on my sword. She expected me to march into a police precinct and lie to a detective, potentially catching a criminal charge myself, just to protect a man who had treated me like dirt his entire life. She wanted me to go to prison so her golden child could go free. I leaned forward, deleted the voicemail with a single tap of my finger, and set the phone face down on the cool marble counter. My smile widened, bright, genuine, and utterly ruthless. They were drowning in the exact ocean of toxicity they had created, and I was not going to throw them a single life preserver. The storm had finally hit, and the destruction was only just beginning. Miles away from my peaceful penthouse, Marcus and Chloe were blissfully unaware of the catastrophic legal hurricane rapidly approaching them. I would later learn every delicious detail of their arrival in Mexico through police reports, court transcripts, and the frantic confessions of my disgraced parents. The sequence of events was a masterclass in watching absolute arrogance collide with the unyielding concrete wall of international law. The wheels of their commercial jet touched down on the sun-baked tarmac of Los Cabos International Airport. Marcus and Chloe were glowing with the intoxicating thrill of their perceived victory. They sat in their spacious first-class seats, finishing the last decadent sips of their complimentary champagne as the plane taxied toward the gate. Chloe adjusted her oversized designer sunglasses, already complaining about the dry cabin air and boasting loudly to the flight attendant about the private oceanfront villa waiting for them. Marcus stretched his legs in his expensive linen trousers, completely convinced that he was the undisputed king of the world. He had successfully bullied his sister, discarded his parental responsibilities, and secured 2 weeks of uninterrupted luxury. They grabbed their premium leather carry-on bags and strutted off the jet bridge, walking past the economy passengers with their signature expressions of haughty superiority. The warm, salty ocean breeze hit their faces as they entered the bustling international arrivals terminal. Marcus reached into his pocket and powered his smartphone back on, expecting to see maybe 1 or 2 defeated text messages from me, confirming that I had taken the children inside. But his phone did not just ping. It aggressively vibrated, completely freezing, as it struggled to download a massive, overwhelming tidal wave of missed calls, urgent voicemails, and frantic text messages. The screen was a chaotic wall of red notification badges. Dozens of missed calls from Mama Denise. Countless frantic messages from Pastor Silas. Alerts from the head deacon of the church. Marcus frowned, his thumb hovering over the screen, irritated that his perfect vacation vibe was being interrupted. Before he could even open a single message to read the disastrous contents, Chloe grabbed his arm and yanked him forward toward the customs and immigration checkpoint. "Hurry up, Marcus!" Chloe whined, tapping her expensive sandals against the polished tile floor. "The private driver is waiting outside, and I absolutely need a margarita in my hand within the next 20 minutes. Do not start checking your work emails now." Marcus shoved his buzzing phone back into his pocket, deciding whatever family drama was happening back in Atlanta could wait until he was comfortably lounging by a private infinity pool. He puffed out his chest and led his wife up to the customs desk, sliding their dark blue American passports across the glass counter with an arrogant, expectant smirk. The Mexican customs agent, a stern man in a crisp uniform, opened Marcus's passport and placed it face down on the digital scanner. For a few seconds, the only sound was the low hum of the airport terminal. Then the agent's computer monitor flashed bright, alarming red. The agent did not stamp the passport. He did not smile and welcome them to Cabo. His eyes darted from the glaring red alert on his screen directly to Marcus's face. The agent slowly closed the passport, placed it securely behind his keyboard, and reached for a heavy black radio clipped to his shoulder. He spoke rapidly in Spanish, his tone low, urgent, and highly official. "Excuse me," Chloe snapped, leaning over the counter and glaring at the agent. "What is the holdup? We are premium global entry members, and we have a very tight schedule. Hand those back so we can leave." The agent ignored her completely. He stepped back from the counter, holding his hand up in a firm gesture, commanding them to stay exactly where they were. Marcus let out a loud, dramatic sigh, shaking his head. "This is unbelievable. Look, buddy, I am a senior corporate director. If there is some sort of random administrative fee or tourist tax you need me to pay to expedite this process, just run my black card. I do not have time for bureaucratic incompetence." He reached for his wallet, fully believing he could simply buy his way out of whatever minor inconvenience was delaying his luxury vacation. But the money in his designer wallet was entirely useless against the force that was currently marching across the terminal toward them. 2 heavily armed Mexican federal police officers, flanked by a tall, sharp-eyed American official wearing an Interpol identification badge, pushed through the crowd of tourists. The surrounding passengers quickly stepped back, sensing the immediate danger and authority radiating from the approaching officers. Marcus Henderson, the American official, asked, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the airport like a sharp blade. Marcus straightened his posture, trying to summon his usual corporate intimidation tactics. "Yes, that is me. Who is asking? And why is my passport currently being held hostage by this agent?" The official did not blink. He pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. "I am a liaison with the International Criminal Police Organization, acting on a direct, expedited request from the United States Department of Justice and the state of Georgia. You and your wife, Chloe Henderson, are currently under international travel restrictions. Your passports have been officially seized and revoked." Chloe let out a piercing, indignant laugh, looking at the heavily armed officers, as if they were performing a terrible comedy routine. Are you completely insane? We have a private villa waiting. We are American citizens. You cannot just steal our passports. My father is a highly influential real estate developer in Atlanta. I will have your job for this. The official turned his cold gaze toward Chloe. Ma'am, you are not going to a villa. You are being detained. Arrest warrants have been issued for both of you by a superior court judge in Fulton County, Georgia. You are officially charged with 3 counts of felony child abandonment and severe reckless endangerment of a minor. The words echoed in the large open terminal. Felony child abandonment. Marcus's face drained of all color. The arrogant, untouchable corporate director vanished in a millisecond, replaced by a terrified, hyperventilating coward. His knees visibly buckled. He reached out to grab the edge of the customs counter to stop himself from collapsing onto the floor. What? Marcus stammered, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic pitch. No, you do not understand. There is a massive misunderstanding. My children are with my sister. I dropped them off at my sister's house. She is watching them. Your children were abandoned on the front porch of a stranger. The official stated, his voice completely devoid of any human sympathy. The homeowner contacted emergency services. Your children are currently wards of the state of Georgia residing in a protective emergency facility. Your sister does not live at that address, and you failed to verify adult supervision before fleeing the country. You are both considered flight risks. Chloe screamed. It was not a scream of maternal concern for her children. It was a vicious, guttural scream of absolute fury directed entirely at her husband. She shoved Marcus hard in the chest, her expensive designer handbag slipping off her shoulder and crashing to the floor. You told me she would take them, Chloe shrieked, her face turning a blotchy, violently angry shade of red. You promised me she was a spineless pushover. You said she was at that house. You lied to me. I am not going to jail because you have a pathetic, dysfunctional family. Marcus frantically dug his shaking hands into his pockets, pulling out his smartphone. He finally opened the avalanche of notifications he had ignored earlier. He saw the frantic text messages from Mama Denise detailing the horrific public humiliation at the church. He saw the news alerts. He saw the messages from his boss demanding an immediate explanation for why police detectives were calling the corporate headquarters looking for him. His entire life, his career, his reputation, and his freedom had completely burned to ash while he was sipping champagne in the sky. The federal police officers stepped forward, moving with swift professional aggression. They grabbed Marcus and Chloe by the arms, physically pulling them away from the customs desk. Chloe thrashed and kicked, screaming obscenities, demanding to call her wealthy father and threatening to sue the entire nation of Mexico. Marcus offered absolutely no resistance. He was completely catatonic, staring blankly at the floor as the officers marched them through the crowded airport. They were not taken to a pristine sandy beach. They were escorted into a bleak, windowless, freezing security holding room deep within the bowels of the airport terminal. They were stripped of their expensive jewelry, their shoelaces, and their belts to comply with international detainment protocols. They sat on hard metal benches for 3 agonizing hours, listening to the muffled sounds of happy tourists outside the heavy steel door. The reality of their catastrophic mistake crushed the remaining oxygen from their lungs. When the door finally opened, they were not offered legal counsel or a phone call. The Interpol liaison walked in holding 2 boarding passes. We have coordinated your immediate deportation back to the United States, the official announced coldly. You will be escorted to the gate by armed guards. You will be seated in the last row of a commercial flight. You will not speak to each other. You will not cause a disturbance. Upon landing at Hartsfield-Jackson, you will be transferred directly into the custody of the Atlanta Police Department, where you will be formally booked, processed, and placed in a holding cell to await your arraignment. The walk of shame through the airport terminal was absolute, unadulterated torture for them. Surrounded by uniformed officers, Marcus and Chloe were frog-marched past the very same duty-free shops and luxury lounges they had eagerly anticipated visiting. Fellow passengers pulled out their phones, snapping photos and recording videos of the well-dressed, heavily guarded couple being forced onto the aircraft. They were shoved into the cramped, miserable back row of the plane, seated right next to the lavatories. For the entire 4-hour flight back to Atlanta, Marcus stared out the small plastic window, his reflection showing a broken, ruined man. Chloe sat beside him, weeping violently, already plotting how she would throw him entirely under the bus the second she secured a defense attorney. Their perfect, wealthy, untouchable marriage was actively disintegrating thousands of feet in the air. Their dream vacation had turned into a high-speed train ride straight to hell. And while they flew back to face the devastating criminal reality of their actions, my parents were actively plotting their own disastrous move, preparing to bring their hysterical desperation directly to the front door of my luxury penthouse. My parents did not waste a single moment after fleeing their disgraced sanctuary. Desperation is a powerful motivator, and for a man like Pastor Silas, who had spent decades cultivating a vast network of influential church members, tracking me down was only a matter of time. He immediately weaponized his congregation, calling in a frantic favor from a loyal deacon who worked in the county real estate records department. It took them less than 3 hours to trace the sale of my old suburban home and uncover the address of the newly purchased luxury property registered under my holding company. When their modest sedan pulled up to the heavily guarded, ultra-exclusive high-rise in the wealthiest district of the city, they were entirely unprepared for the reality of my existence. They aggressively bypassed the valet, marching up to the marble concierge desk with the righteous, unhinged fury of parents who believed they owned their adult child. The concierge, a highly trained professional, accustomed to dealing with overzealous visitors, calmly blocked their path and called up to my penthouse. I was standing by the glass window looking out over the city when the intercom buzzed. When the concierge informed me that my parents were causing a scene in the lobby, demanding immediate access, I did not panic. I simply smiled. I instructed security to grant them access to my private elevator. I wanted them to come up. I wanted them to step out of those doors and choke on the staggering magnitude of the empire I had built completely without them. If a camera were capturing this exact moment, the lens would slowly push in, zooming closer and closer to my face, highlighting the absolute, unshakable stillness of my posture. The frame would perfectly capture the stark, glaring contrast between my cold, calculated peace and the hysterical, frantic madness that was about to burst into my home. The gold-plated elevator doors slid silently open, opening directly into my expansive, sunlit living room. Pastor Silas and Mama Denise stepped off the elevator, their chests heaving, their faces flushed bright red with manic panic. For a fraction of a second, the sheer scale of the penthouse physically stopped them in their tracks. Their eyes darted wildly across the custom-imported furniture, the priceless modern art hanging on the walls, and the sweeping, unobstructed panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. They were standing in a multi-million-dollar fortress, a towering monument to success that far eclipsed anything their golden child Marcus had ever achieved. But toxic entitlement is a blinding disease. The shock of my wealth did not humble them. It did not spark a single moment of maternal pride or paternal respect. Instead, it fueled a dark, venomous outrage. In their twisted minds, my prosperity was a direct insult to their authority. "You are an absolute demon!" Mama Denise shrieked, her voice shattering the quiet elegance of my home. The heavy, ornate church hat she had worn to service was sitting slightly crooked on her head, completely destroying her usual pristine image. She lunged forward, pointing a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face. "How dare you? How dare you move out of your house without telling us? How dare you sit up here in this extravagant palace while your own flesh and blood is being treated like a common criminal?" I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply remained seated in my plush velvet armchair, slowly lifting my porcelain cup to take a deliberate sip of my freshly brewed coffee. My father stepped up beside her, his pastoral mask completely stripped away, leaving only a desperate, terrified man trying to salvage his ruined reputation. "Do you have any idea what you have done to this family?" he bellowed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "The police embarrassed us in front of 2,000 people. The church board is already calling an emergency meeting. Marcus and Chloe are in federal custody on their way back to Atlanta, and Chloe's wealthy parents are threatening to sue us all into bankruptcy. You are going to fix this right now. I gently placed my coffee cup onto the glass table. And how exactly do you propose I fix the fact that your son dumped his children on a stranger's porch and fled the country? I asked, my tone dangerously even. Mama Denise slammed her hands onto the back of my velvet sofa, leaning over it like a predator. You are going to march down to the police precinct this very second, she ordered, her eyes wide and unblinking. You are going to look that detective in the eye and tell him you made a terrible mistake. You will say you got your days mixed up. You will say you were supposed to be at the house to receive those children, and it was entirely your fault that you were not there. You will sign whatever confession they put in front of you. I stared at her, genuinely marveling at the boundless depth of her delusion. You want me to walk into a police station and falsely confess to a felony? You want me to willingly hand over my freedom, my clean record, and my entire corporate career just to keep Marcus out of prison? Yes, she screamed, completely unhinged. You have no husband, you have no children to worry about. If you spend a few months in jail, it does not matter. Marcus is a father, he is a senior director, he has a legacy to protect. You owe this family your loyalty. Pastor Silas aggressively nodded in agreement, pointing a heavy finger at the floor. You clearly have millions of dollars hidden away from us. You will immediately liquidate your savings and hire the best defense attorneys in the state for your brother. You will pay Chloe's parents whatever settlement they demand to keep them quiet. You will drain every single account you have to restore the reputation of this family, or so help me God, you will burn in the deepest pits of hell. They stood there, chest heaving, fully expecting the psychological conditioning of my childhood to kick in. They expected the religious guilt, the cultural pressure, and their booming authoritative demands to break my spirit. They waited for my shoulders to slump, for my eyes to fill with tears of submission, and for me to blindly accept the role of the sacrificial lamb. I picked up my coffee cup again, taking another slow, luxurious sip. I savored the rich, dark roast, letting the silence stretch out until the tension in the room became almost unbearable. No, I said. The word dropped into the room like a heavy anvil. Mama Denise gasped, clutching her chest as if I had physically struck her. Excuse me. I said no. I repeated, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. I told Marcus 2 weeks ago that I was not taking his children. I told you at the dinner table that I was not his servant. He made the conscious, arrogant decision to endanger his own kids. His crime is his own. His spectacular downfall is his own. I have absolutely no obligation to fall on a sword for a pathetic, weak man who threw his family away for a margarita on the beach. You ungrateful, wicked girl, my father roared, taking a threatening step forward. I will destroy you for this. I will make sure no one in the city ever speaks your name again. You do not have the power to destroy anything anymore, I replied, standing up slowly from my chair. I smoothed the lapels of my silk suit, towering over them with the absolute authority of a woman who had finally recognized her own untouchable worth. Your church is currently evaluating your termination because you raised a felon. Your golden child is sitting in handcuffs on a commercial flight. You have absolutely nothing left to threaten me with. I reached over to the sleek digital intercom panel mounted on the wall. I pressed the silver button, keeping my cold, unyielding gaze locked on my parents' horrified faces. Security, I said clearly into the microphone. I have 2 hostile trespassers in my penthouse. They are refusing to leave. Please send a team up immediately to escort them off the premises. If they resist, you have my full authorization to contact the police and press charges for trespassing and harassment. Mama Denise let out a strangled, breathless cry, stumbling backward toward the elevator doors. You would call the police on your own mother. I already told you, I stated, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. I am not your daughter anymore. I am just a woman who used to know you. Within 90 seconds, the elevator doors chimed and slid open. 4 heavily built, imposing security guards stepped into my living room, their expressions entirely strictly professional. They did not hesitate. They flanked my parents on both sides, their sheer physical presence leaving zero room for negotiation. Please step into the elevator, sir, the lead guard instructed, gesturing firmly toward the open doors. Pastor Silas tried to puff out his chest, attempting one last display of pastoral authority, but the guard immediately stepped closer, forcing my father to retreat into the elevator cab. Mama Denise followed, her face completely washed out. her hands shaking violently as the reality of her total defeat finally crashed down upon her. She looked at me one last time, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and absolute disbelief. The woman she had bullied, controlled, and diminished for 32 years had just physically thrown her out of a multi-million-dollar fortress. The heavy gold doors slid shut, cutting off her final frantic scream. The penthouse immediately returned to its pristine, perfect silence. I took a deep breath, the clean, quiet air filling my lungs. I walked back over to my velvet armchair, picked up my espresso, and turned my attention back to the glittering city skyline. The first wave of their attack had been completely neutralized, but I knew the real war was only just beginning. Because tomorrow morning, Marcus and Chloe were going to be released on bail, and they were going to come looking for blood. But they had no idea that I had spent the last year quietly digging a financial grave so deep they would never ever climb out. The weekend concluded with absolute silence from my end, but I knew the legal machinery was churning at full speed. By Monday morning, Marcus and Chloe had managed to scrape together enough money to post bail. I had anticipated they would immediately try to hunt me down. Since they had already been permanently banned from my residential building, they turned their desperate, frantic attention to the only other location they could find: my corporate headquarters. They still believed I was just a mid-level employee working for someone else. They assumed they could march into my workplace, cause a massive scene, and intimidate my boss into firing me as some sort of twisted revenge. They had no idea that the towering glass-enclosed skyscraper they were marching into was entirely owned by my holding company, or that the elite commercial real estate firm occupying the top 10 floors was my own creation. I was standing in the grand, sweeping marble lobby of the building, conducting a brief morning meeting with my executive team and several high-profile investors. The lobby was a masterpiece of modern architecture flooded with natural light, featuring cascading water walls and polished chrome accents. It was a space designed to project absolute power and unyielding authority. At exactly 9 in the morning, the heavy revolving glass doors were violently shoved open. Marcus and Chloe stumbled into the pristine lobby, shattering the quiet professional atmosphere like a live grenade. The sight of them was almost shocking. The perfectly curated, wealthy suburban couple had been entirely erased. They looked like cornered rabid animals. Chloe was wearing the exact same designer silk trousers she had worn on her flight to Cabo, but they were now horribly wrinkled and stained from spending 48 hours in a county holding cell. Her usually flawless blonde hair was matted and chaotic. Her expensive makeup was completely smeared around her eyes. Marcus looked even worse. His custom suit was disheveled, his tie was missing, and his face was pale with sheer, unadulterated panic. They had just been released on bail, but the reality of their situation had clearly broken their minds. The judge had ordered them to surrender their passports permanently. A temporary restraining order had been issued barring them from coming within 500 feet of their own children while the criminal investigation proceeded. They were actively losing custody, facing years in federal prison, and their entire social standing had been vaporized in a single weekend. Chloe spotted me standing near the reception desk. Her eyes went wide with a manic, unhinged fury. She did not care that there were dozens of wealthy clients, executives, and professionals staring at her. She completely abandoned whatever refined upper-class manners she pretended to have and charged across the marble floor directly toward me. "You—" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking as it echoed off the high ceilings. Her face was twisted into an ugly, hateful sneer. "You did this to me." Marcus trailed closely behind her, his fists clenched, his breathing heavy and erratic. "Nia, what the hell is wrong with you?" he bellowed, trying to match his wife's chaotic energy. "We are losing our kids. Child Protective Services will not even let us speak to them on the phone. They are treating us like common criminals." I did not take a single step back. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting calmly at my sides, watching them unravel with absolute detachment. Chloe closed the distance, stopping just a few feet away from me. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at my face. Her mask was entirely gone, revealing the deep-seated putrid bigotry and classism she had always harbored toward me. "You are nothing but jealous, low-class trash!" Chloe screamed, her voice vibrating with pure venom. You have always been jealous of my family. You have always hated that your brother married someone like me instead of some pathetic loser like you. You set us up because you are a bitter, lonely woman who cannot stand to see anyone else happy. Because of you, I am facing a prison sentence. Because of your lazy, vindictive attitude, my children were taken away. The entire lobby had frozen. Executives stopped mid-sentence. Investors lowered their briefcases. The heavy silence in the grand space was deafening, save for Chloe's hysterical, gasping breaths. I looked at the woman who had tormented me for years. I looked at the brother who had enabled every single second of her abuse. They expected me to shrink. They expected me to cry, to apologize, or to show even a fraction of the fear I used to carry. Instead, I raised my right hand and snapped my fingers twice. The response was instantaneous. The security team in my building did not consist of standard lobby guards. They were highly trained elite private security professionals tasked with protecting billionaires and corporate executives. Before Marcus or Chloe could take another aggressive step forward, 4 large, imposing security officers moved with terrifying speed. They flanked Marcus and Chloe in perfect unison. 2 guards grabbed Marcus by the arms, effortlessly twisting them behind his back and forcing him to a sudden, jarring halt. The other 2 guards intercepted Chloe, gripping her shoulders with enough force to completely immobilize her. "Get your hands off me!" Chloe shrieked, kicking her expensive sandals against the polished marble floor. "Do you know who my father is? I will have all of you fired. I will sue this entire building." Marcus struggled against the guards gripping his arms, his face turning a dark shade of red. "Nia, tell them to let us go right now," he demanded, still foolishly believing he possessed an ounce of authority over me. "You are going to fix this mess. You are going to call the police and tell them you agreed to watch the kids." I slowly shook my head, marveling at his boundless, staggering delusion. "You really do not understand where you are, do you, Marcus?" I said, my voice cutting through the lobby with calm, lethal precision. I took a slow, deliberate step forward. "You thought you could walk into my corporate headquarters and throw a temper tantrum. You thought you could intimidate me in front of my employees. But you forgot one very important detail. You do not own me anymore." I turned my head slightly, catching the eye of my executive assistant, who was standing quietly near the reception desk. She knew exactly what I needed. She stepped forward and handed me a massive, incredibly thick manila folder. It was bursting with hundreds of pages of financial records, bank statements, and highly classified documents. I took the heavy folder in my hands and walked slowly toward my brother and his wife. The guards held them firmly in place, forcing them to watch my every move. The audience of executives and clients watched in absolute stunned fascination. I reached the sleek glass surface of the main reception desk. I raised the thick stack of files high in the air and slammed it down onto the glass with a violent, resounding crash. The sound cracked through the silent lobby like a whip, making Chloe physically flinch. "You want to talk about fixing things, Marcus?" I asked, leaning over the heavy stack of documents, my eyes locking onto his terrified face. "Let us talk about exactly how you built that perfect, wealthy life you are so incredibly proud of. Let us talk about the real reason you are going to spend the next decade of your life locked inside a federal prison cell." If there was a camera capturing this moment, it would be positioned close to the polished marble floor, angled sharply upward. From that low vantage point, I towered over them. The bright cascading light from the lobby windows caught my back, casting a long, dark, and absolute shadow that stretched across the floor and completely swallowed my brother and his wife. The security guards held them firmly in place, forcing them to look up at the woman they had spent their entire lives trying to keep pinned to the dirt. I was no longer their scapegoat. I was their judge, their jury, and their executioner. I reached out and flipped open the heavy cover of the manila folder. The top document was a pristine, officially notarized credit report alongside a stack of highly classified bank statements. I slowly slid the papers across the smooth glass desk so Marcus could see the numbers and signatures staring back at him. "Do you recognize these account numbers, Marcus?" I asked, my voice echoing through the dead silence of the lobby. Marcus lowered his eyes to the page, and the very last drop of blood instantly drained from his face. His jaw went completely slack. The arrogant defiance that had fueled him for 35 years evaporated in a millisecond, replaced by a suffocating, paralyzing terror. His knees visibly buckled, and if the security guards had not been gripping his arms with iron strength, he would have collapsed entirely onto the floor. "Did you really think I was just a quiet, obedient doormat all these years?" I asked, taking a deliberate step closer to him. "Did you actually believe I sat at those Sunday dinners, letting you and Chloe insult my career and mock my life because I was too weak to fight back?" "No, Marcus. I was quiet because I was playing a very long game. I was sitting at that table collecting every single piece of evidence I needed to bury you." I reached into the folder and pulled out another thick stack of papers. These were not just credit reports. They were loan applications, vehicle financing agreements, and mortgage deeds. I held them up for the entire lobby to see. 14 years ago, I continued making sure every word was loud and crisp. When I turned 18, you needed fast cash to impress your fraternity brothers. So you went into my room, opened my files, and stole my social security number. You opened a high-limit credit card in my name and maxed it out in 3 weeks. And when our parents found out, what did they do? They begged me not to report it to the police. They cried and manipulated me, saying you were young and foolish, that a criminal record would completely ruin your bright, promising future. They forced me to swallow the debt and made me promise to keep the family peace. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head frantically as if he could somehow deny the past. But the documents in my hand were absolute proof. "But you did not stop at one credit card, did you?" I said, throwing a glossy photograph of his expensive luxury SUV onto the pile. "You kept my information. You memorized my details. As my real estate career took off in secret, my credit score became an impenetrable fortress. I built pristine financial standing, and you, with your bankruptcies, your failed startups, and your bottomless greed, decided to use my identity as your personal, unlimited piggy bank." I turned my attention to Chloe. She was staring at the documents with wide, manic, horrified eyes. The reality of what she was looking at was finally breaking through her thick layer of suburban entitlement. "That massive suburban mansion you love bragging about, Chloe?" I asked, my voice dropping to a cold, razor-sharp whisper. "The one you claim makes you so much better than me. The down payment for that house was secured using a fraudulent corporate loan taken out entirely under my name. That shiny German car you drove to the airport on Friday, it is financed through a shell corporation that traces directly back to my stolen identity." Chloe gasped, her mouth falling open as she stared at her husband in absolute horror. Marcus refused to look at her. He kept his eyes squeezed shut, trembling violently in the grip of the security guards. "Your husband is not a wealthy, successful senior director, Chloe," I stated, dismantling her entire reality piece by piece. "He is a parasite. His sales job barely covers the minimum payments on his legal debts. Everything you own, every designer bag you carry, the private school tuitions for your children, and every expensive vacation you take is funded by the financial blood he has been sucking out of my veins for the last 10 years. He stole my identity, forged my signature on digital applications, and built an empire of debt under my name." Chloe began to hyperventilate. The wealthy, prominent family she came from would be absolutely disgusted by this. She had married a fraud, a man whose entire existence was a carefully constructed, illegal mirage. She looked at the other executives standing in the lobby, the actual self-made wealthy professionals who were watching her world burn to the ground. The humiliation on her face was exquisite. "You thought I was stupid," I said, shifting my gaze back to Marcus. "You thought because I wore simple clothes and drove a standard car, I was just a pathetic failure you could walk all over. But I am a commercial real estate investor. I know exactly how to track assets. I monitored every single fraudulent account you opened. I watched you route wire transfers through dummy LLCs. I let you build your entire fake kingdom on a foundation of gasoline, and I just patiently sat back waiting for the perfect moment to strike the match." Marcus finally opened his eyes. They were brimming with tears of sheer panic. "Nia, please," he begged, his voice a pathetic, broken whisper. "You cannot do this. They will lock me away forever. I will pay you back. I swear to God I will pay you back every single cent. Do not show those papers to the police." I smiled, a slow, merciless expression that made him physically flinch. You are a little too late for that negotiation, Marcus, I replied. I did not just print these documents off the internet to scare you. These files are exact copies of the comprehensive dossier I handed over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation 6 months ago. Chloe let out a piercing, strangled scream. That is right. I continued stepping right into Marcus's personal space. The FBI has been quietly tracking your wire transfers, your offshore accounts, and your fraudulent applications for half a year. The only reason they had not kicked your custom front door down yet was because they were taking their time building a flawless, airtight federal indictment for identity theft and massive wire fraud. But your little stunt on Friday, putting your kids in an Uber and fleeing to Mexico, that triggered a severe flight risk alert. You expedited their timeline for me. I tapped the thick folder resting on the glass desk. I am not just your sister anymore, Marcus. I am the primary victim and the star witness in a massive federal investigation against you. And more importantly, I am the owner of the holding company that just purchased the debt portfolios from the very banks you defrauded. I own your house. I own your cars. I am the biggest, most unforgiving creditor you will ever face. The weight of my words completely crushed whatever fight he had left in him. He sagged against the security guards, a hollow, empty shell of the arrogant man who had tried to order me around at the dinner table. Chloe was sobbing uncontrollably now, violently cursing at Marcus, calling him a liar and a thief, desperately trying to distance herself from the man she had proudly enabled just a few days prior. I looked at the two of them, utterly disgusted by the pathetic display. They had spent their entire lives stepping on my neck to make themselves feel taller. Now they were drowning in a sea of federal charges and public disgrace, and I held the only life vest. And I was going to watch them sink. I took a deliberate step back, allowing the sheer crushing gravity of my words to suffocate whatever remaining oxygen existed in that grand marble lobby. I looked at my brother, watching his eyes dart wildly around the room, as the undeniable reality of his absolute ruin finally registered in his brain. He was no longer a proud, arrogant senior director. He was a cornered, terrified animal caught in a trap he had spent a decade building for himself. "Did you honestly think I sold my old house just to hide from you?" I asked, my voice carrying a lethal, echoing clarity that sliced through the dead silence of the room. "Did you think I was just running away from your ridiculous babysitting demands and packing my bags out of fear? No, Marcus. I sold that property to generate an immediate, untraceable surge of liquid cash. I took those funds, and I officially acquired the exact distressed credit portfolio that holds every single one of your toxic, fraudulent loans. I am not just the sister you tried to bully. I am your biggest, most uncompromising creditor. I own the paper on your entire fake life." Marcus tried to speak, to beg, to formulate some kind of pathetic excuse, but his throat was completely dry. He opened and closed his mouth, gasping for air that his panic-stricken lungs simply could not process. He looked to his wife for support, searching for the wealthy, entitled partner who had always bolstered his massive ego. But Chloe was having a visceral, violent reaction to the truth. The pristine, heavily curated facade of the perfect suburban power couple was disintegrating right in front of my eyes. Chloe stared at Marcus, her face contorting with a mixture of absolute disgust and raw, unhinged terror. The realization that the wealthy, successful man she had married was actually a broke, pathetic fraudster was completely breaking her mind. "You lied to me!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking as she violently thrashed against the grip of the security guards. She did not care about her public image anymore. She did not care about the executives watching her. She lunged toward Marcus, her manicured nails clawing at the air between them. "You told me you were making millions. You told me your company was paying for the mansion. You used a stolen identity to buy my engagement ring. You are nothing but a broke, pathetic criminal. You ruined my life. My family is going to disown me." Marcus flinched, shrinking away from his wife's furious accusations. "Chloe, please," he stammered, his voice a weak, trembling whisper. "I did it for us. I did it to give you the lifestyle you deserved. I was going to pay it all back. You paid for it with my stolen social security number, I interjected coldly, shutting down his pathetic attempt at playing the devoted husband. You committed wire fraud. Every single time you transferred funds from those stolen accounts to pay for your luxury vacations, your country club fees, and Chloe's designer wardrobe, you triggered another federal charge. The FBI has the IP addresses. They have the forged digital signatures. They have the tracking numbers for every single unauthorized transaction you made over the last decade. I handed over the entire meticulously documented file. Chloe suddenly stopped thrashing. Her furious glare snapped away from Marcus and locked onto me. The arrogant racist venom she had spewed at me just minutes prior completely vanished. The woman who had called me low-class trash was now staring at me with the wide, desperate eyes of a terrified child. Nia, you have to tell them. I did not know, Chloe pleaded, her voice dropping into a pathetic, whimpering sob. I swear to God I had no idea he was using your identity. He handled all the finances. He lied to me too. You cannot let them send me to prison. I have a prominent family. I cannot survive in a federal facility. Please, you have to tell the FBI I am a victim here. I looked at her feeling absolutely no sympathy for the woman who had happily mocked my career and insulted my existence for years. Ignorance is not a valid legal defense when you happily spent the stolen money, Chloe. I replied, my tone completely devoid of mercy. You wore the clothes bought with my stolen credit. You slept in the mansion secured by my forged signature. You enjoyed the absolute finest fruits of his criminal labor. But you can try explaining your innocence to the federal prosecutors. I am sure they will love hearing how you were just a helpless, oblivious participant in a massive wire fraud conspiracy. Chloe let out a devastated, breathless wail. Her knees gave out, and she slumped toward the marble floor, entirely supported by the two security guards holding her arms. She was a broken, ruined woman, completely stripped of the wealthy privilege that had shielded her from reality her entire life. Marcus finally broke. The sheer overwhelming weight of his impending federal prison sentence crushed the last remaining fragments of his pride. He stopped struggling against the guards. He slumped forward, his head hanging in absolute defeat, tears of genuine panic spilling down his cheeks and dripping onto the expensive lapel of his ruined suit. Nia, please, Marcus begged, openly sobbing in the middle of my corporate lobby. Take the cars, take the house, take everything I have. Just drop the FBI charges. I will sign whatever you want. I will leave the state. I will never speak to you again. Please, I cannot go to federal prison. I will not survive. You are my sister. You have to save me. I stepped closer to him, lowering my voice, so only he and Chloe could hear my final, devastating verdict. You have absolutely nothing left to give me, Marcus. I stated, my words striking him like physical blows. The bank is initiating foreclosure proceedings on the mansion by the end of this week. The repossession trucks are already en route to collect the vehicles you fraudulently financed. You are completely wiped out. You are entirely stripped down to nothing. You spent your entire life treating me like a disposable stepping stone. You thought you could throw your children onto my porch and fly away without a care in the world. Now you get to sit in a concrete cell and think about the empire I built while you were busy digging your own grave. I straightened my posture, smoothing the front of my plum-colored suit. I turned my attention to the head of my security detail. These two individuals just violated the strict conditions of their felony bail by coming here to harass and intimidate a key witness in an ongoing federal investigation, I informed the lead guard clearly. Contact the local precinct. Tell them to send a squad car to collect 2 bail violators. Keep them restrained until the authorities arrive. Yes, ma'am, the guard responded immediately, tightening his grip on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus let out a final agonizing cry of despair, realizing that he had just handed the police the exact reason they needed to revoke his bail and send him straight back to a jail cell. Chloe continued to sob uncontrollably, dragging the toes of her expensive designer heels against the polished marble floor as the guards forcefully marched them toward a secure holding room off the main lobby. I stood in the center of the grand foyer, watching them disappear behind a heavy oak door. The toxic, suffocating storm that had plagued my entire existence had finally been neutralized. I turned around to face my executive team and the group of high-profile investors who had witnessed the entire brutal, calculated execution in stunned silence. They were staring at me with a mixture of absolute awe and deep unspoken respect. They had just watched their CEO surgically dismantle two hostile threats without ever raising her voice. I offered them a calm, professional smile, effortlessly transitioning back into the role of the untouchable corporate leader. "I apologize for the brief interruption, gentlemen," I said, my voice smooth and commanding. "Shall we return to the boardroom and finalize the details of our merger?" The lead investor nodded quickly, gesturing for me to lead the way. I walked toward the private elevator, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. I had officially severed the rotting branches of my family tree. I had reclaimed my name, my finances, and my absolute freedom. But there was still one final chapter left in this story. The gavel had not yet dropped in the courtroom, and my parents had not yet faced the ultimate devastating consequences of enabling a monster. The real day of reckoning was approaching, and I was going to ensure that their fake perfect legacy was permanently buried under the weight of the truth. If you could see me now, the camera would be gliding smoothly around my chair, capturing the absolute tranquility in my eyes, as I remember the day my brother's fake empire completely collapsed under the crushing weight of a judge's gavel. The family court hearing took place 3 weeks later in a heavy wood-paneled courtroom in Fulton County. The air inside was thick with tension, smelling of polished mahogany and absolute dread. I sat quietly in the very back row of the gallery, wearing a pristine white suit completely invisible to the frantic people at the front of the room. A few rows ahead of me sat Pastor Silas and Mama Denise. They looked completely unrecognizable. The proud, booming church leaders who used to parade around in custom suits and extravagant hats were gone. They looked shrunken, aged, and terrified. They huddled together on the hard wooden bench, gripping each other's hands, forced to watch the agonizing public execution of their golden child. Marcus and Chloe did not sit together. The unified, arrogant power couple that had marched into my corporate lobby weeks prior no longer existed. The stress of impending federal indictments and the looming threat of prison had completely shattered their marriage. They sat at separate defense tables, flanked by different court-appointed attorneys glaring at each other with pure, unfiltered hatred. The hearing was specifically to determine the permanent placement of their 3 children, Maya, Jamal, and little Leo, who were still safely residing in the state foster care system. Marcus's defense attorney, a sweating, overworked man who clearly knew he was fighting a losing battle, tried his absolute best to spin a fairy tale. He stood before the stern-faced family court judge and attempted to paint the abandonment as a simple, unfortunate miscommunication. He used a soft, pleading voice, claiming Marcus loved his children deeply and genuinely believed his sister was home to receive them. He called it a logistical error, a minor lapse in judgment caused by the high stress of corporate burnout. He argued that removing the children permanently would be a cruel overreaction to a simple sibling misunderstanding. It was a pathetic attempt to excuse a severe felony, and the judge stared down from the bench, completely unamused by the performance. But the true, unadulterated devastation arrived when the state called their star witness. Helen Sterling walked through the heavy courtroom doors, wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit. Her silver hair was pulled back flawlessly. She did not look like a random suburban homeowner who happened to stumble upon a crime. She looked like the absolute wrath of the justice system brought to life. When she took the witness stand, the entire room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The state prosecutor asked her to recount the exact events of that freezing November afternoon. Helen did not just tell a story. She delivered a surgical military strike. She detailed the exact dropping temperature outside. She described the inadequate, thin designer clothing the children were wearing, noting that little Leo was shivering violently when she opened the door. She read the crumpled sticky note aloud for the court record, highlighting the complete absence of emergency contacts, medical information, or basic parental care. Marcus's attorney stood up desperately, attempting a cross-examination to save his sinking client. He tried to suggest that Helen was exaggerating the danger. He implied that she was just a nervous civilian, that the suburban neighborhood was incredibly safe, and that the children were never in any real physical peril. Helen leaned forward into the microphone, her sharp eyes locking onto the defense attorney with a terrifying, unyielding intensity. She stated her full name and her official title for the court record: Head Commissioner of Child Protective Services for the state of Georgia. A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. My parents physically recoiled in their seats. Marcus dropped his head into his hands, realizing he had not just abandoned his kids on a random porch, he had handed them directly to the ultimate boss of the state welfare system. Helen systematically dismantled the defense's entire argument, citing specific state child welfare codes and penal codes from memory. She looked directly at Marcus and stated that in her 3 decades of public service, she had rarely seen such a callous, premeditated, and selfish abandonment of vulnerable minors. She testified that if the children had been dropped off just 1 hour later, when the severe cold front moved, the youngest child would have likely suffered from acute hypothermia. The defense attorney physically shrank back, muttering a quick, embarrassed apology before hastily sitting down. He knew his case was dead on arrival. The sheer crushing reality of Helen's testimony broke whatever fragile alliance remained between my brother and his wife. Chloe realized in that exact moment that the ship was rapidly sinking into the abyss, and she was entirely unwilling to drown with her husband. Desperation breeds betrayal, and Chloe was a master opportunist. She knew she was facing jail time, and she decided her only way out was to destroy the man sitting at the table next to her. Against the frantic whispering of her own legal counsel, Chloe stood up and demanded to speak to the judge. She threw herself entirely on the mercy of the court. She burst into theatrical, hyperventilating tears, clutching her chest as if she were having a panic attack. She pointed a shaking, accusing finger directly at Marcus. She told the judge that she was a victim of his severe emotional manipulation. She lied through her teeth, her voice echoing with fake, trembling sobs, claiming that she had begged Marcus to cancel the Cabo trip. She swore to the court that she had desperately wanted to stay home with her precious children, but Marcus had physically intimidated her into getting on that flight. She spun a wild narrative, assuring the judge that Marcus had lied to her, promising that I was happily waiting on the porch to receive the kids. She threw her husband completely under the bus, desperately trying to distance herself from the felony charges to save her own skin. She painted Marcus as a controlling, abusive monster who orchestrated the entire abandonment against her explicit will. Marcus absolutely lost his mind. The betrayal from the woman he had stolen my identity to impress, the woman he had ruined his life to please, completely shattered his remaining sanity. He leaped out of his chair, knocking it backward onto the hard courtroom floor with a loud crash. He screamed at Chloe at the top of his lungs, his face turning a violent, explosive shade of purple. The bailiffs instantly moved forward, resting their hands on their duty belts, but Marcus was too enraged to care. He called her a parasitic gold digger right in front of the judge. He shouted to the entire courtroom that she had hated being a mother, that she constantly complained about the children ruining her elite social life, and that the luxury vacation was entirely her demanding idea. He revealed deeply personal, toxic secrets about their marriage, airing their dirty laundry for the public record. He screamed that she was just as guilty as he was, begging the judge not to let her play the innocent victim. He admitted in his blind fury that they had both planned the abandonment together because Chloe refused to pay for a professional nanny. The judge slammed her heavy wooden gavel down repeatedly, her voice booming over the courtroom, demanding absolute order. But the two of them were completely unhinged. They hurled vicious, venomous insults back and forth, completely ignoring the legal decorum of the room. They pointed fingers, assigned blame, and tore each other to absolute shreds. Sitting in the back row, I watched them destroy each other with cold, detached fascination. They proved without a single shadow of a doubt that they were entirely unfit to raise a houseplant, let alone 3 young children. They fully exposed the ugly, rotten core of their fake, prestigious lives. The golden child and his perfect wife were nothing more than 2 selfish, desperate criminals cannibalizing each other to save themselves. And the best part was, I did not have to lift a single finger to make it happen. I just had to sit back, stay quiet, and let their own boundless entitlement burn their kingdom to the ground. The judge finally managed to restore order, holding both Marcus and Chloe in contempt before calling a brief recess prior to the formal criminal sentencing. The custody matter was settled. The children were permanently removed from their toxic care. But the state still had to hand down the criminal penalties for the felony abandonment. I stepped out of the heavy wooden doors and walked into the bright, echoing marble hallway of the courthouse. I was adjusting the cuff of my pristine white blazer when I saw them approaching. Pastor Silas and Mama Denise were practically stumbling toward me. The arrogant, untouchable church leaders were completely gone. In their place were two broken, desperate people who had just watched their golden child self-destruct. They did not demand. They did not yell. In front of passing lawyers, bailiffs, and court reporters, my parents did the unthinkable. They collapsed onto the cold marble floor. They fell to their knees right at my feet. Mama Denise grabbed the hem of my trousers, her face stained with streaks of mascara and bitter tears. "Nia, please," she sobbed, her voice a fragile, broken gasp. "The judge is going to sentence him to prison. You have to take the stand. You have to be a character witness for your brother. Tell the judge he is a good man who made a terrible mistake. Tell them about his career, his faith, anything. You are a successful businesswoman now. The judge will listen to you. You are his only hope." Pastor Silas clasped his trembling hands together, looking up at me with red, swollen eyes. "We are begging you, Nia. We have lost everything today. Do not let them lock my son away in a cage. Show some Christian mercy. Save your brother." I looked down at the two people who had spent my entire life making me feel completely worthless. I looked at the hands that had pushed me aside to elevate a monster. I felt absolutely no pity, but I offered them a soft, reassuring smile. I reached down, gently peeled my mother's hands off my suit, and stepped back. "I will take the stand," I said, my voice projecting a calm, unwavering certainty. "I will tell the judge exactly who Marcus really is." Relief washed over their faces. They scrambled to their feet, whispering prayers of gratitude, completely blind to the executioner's axe, hovering right above their necks. When court reconvened, the gallery was packed to capacity. Word had spread, and several prominent members of our church community were sitting in the back rows, whispering anxiously. I walked through the wooden gates and took my place on the witness stand. The bailiff swore me in, and I sat down, adjusting the microphone. Marcus looked up at me from the defense table. His eyes were wide with desperate, pathetic hope. He truly believed that family loyalty, the very concept he had weaponized against me for 32 years, was about to save his life. The defense attorney approached the podium. "Miss Henderson, can you please tell the court about your brother's character? Is it true he is a hardworking, dedicated provider who simply succumbed to the overwhelming stress of his corporate responsibilities?" I leaned forward into the microphone. The courtroom was dead silent. "My brother is incredibly dedicated to his lifestyle," I stated, my voice echoing crisply off the high ceilings. "He has built a massive, sprawling empire. He lives in a multi-million-dollar mansion. He drives luxury imported vehicles. He sends his children to elite private academies. He presents himself as a pillar of success and Christian morality." Marcus nodded vigorously, tears of relief welling in his eyes. Mama Denise let out an audible sigh of praise from the gallery. "But it is all a complete, meticulously crafted lie." I continued, my tone dropping to a sharp, lethal register. "Marcus Henderson is not a dedicated provider. He is a prolific, remorseless predator." The smile instantly vanished from Marcus's face. The defense attorney froze, his mouth dropping open in shock. I reached into my tailored briefcase and pulled out the thick, heavily documented financial dossier I had presented in my corporate lobby weeks prior. I held it up for the judge to see. "Your Honor," I said, maintaining direct eye contact with the bench, "my brother did not build his life through hard work. He built it by stealing my Social Security number when I was 18 years old. Every single asset he claims to own was secured through massive premeditated wire fraud and identity theft. I have brought the certified bank records, the forged loan applications, and the offshore routing numbers. He did not abandon his children because he was stressed from working hard. He abandoned them because he is a highly calculating criminal who was desperately trying to flee the country before the Federal Bureau of Investigation could kick his custom front door down. Chaos erupted. The defense attorney began shouting frantic objections, but the judge slammed her gavel, ordering him to stand down. She instructed the bailiff to approach the witness stand and retrieve the dossier. I handed it over seamlessly. The judge opened the thick folder, her eyes rapidly scanning the certified financial documents, the fraudulent signatures, and the overwhelming, undeniable proof of a decade-long criminal enterprise. Marcus was screaming now, pulling at his own hair, realizing that the sister he thought was throwing him a lifeline had just wrapped an anchor around his neck and kicked him into the deep end of the ocean. The judge closed the folder with a loud, definitive thud. She looked down at Marcus with absolute, unmasked disgust. "Mr. Henderson," the judge declared, her voice ringing with absolute finality, "I was prepared to sentence you to the maximum state penalty for felony child abandonment. However, considering the staggering magnitude of the financial crimes presented in this sworn testimony, state prison is no longer your primary concern. I am remanding you immediately into federal custody. You will face the United States Department of Justice for aggravated identity theft and federal wire fraud. You are looking at decades behind bars." The sound of the heavy handcuffs clicking around Marcus's wrists was the sweetest music I had ever heard. He sobbed uncontrollably as the federal marshals dragged him out of the courtroom. His entire fake empire was completely pulverized. Chloe did not escape the wrath of the bench. The judge turned her cold gaze to my sister-in-law. Because Chloe had been a willing participant in the abandonment and had lived lavishly on stolen funds, the judge showed zero mercy. Chloe was permanently stripped of all parental rights. She was sentenced to 5 years of rigorous probation and mandated to complete thousands of hours of grueling physical community service. She walked out of that courtroom completely penniless, publicly humiliated, and stripped of the wealthy privilege that had defined her entire existence. She was nothing but a disgraced, destitute woman with a felony record. But the final, most devastating blow did not happen inside the courtroom. It happened in the very community my parents valued more than oxygen. The news of my testimony spread through the Atlanta church network like a massive, unstoppable shockwave. The prominent church members sitting in the gallery took the horrific truth straight back to the congregation. By the time Pastor Silas and Mama Denise managed to drag themselves back to their church that evening, the locks on the heavy oak doors had already been changed. The board of deacons men who had previously bowed to my father's authority stood waiting on the front steps. They did not offer prayers or comfort. They handed my father a formal, legally binding termination letter. They fired Pastor Silas on the spot, citing severe moral turpitude, financial corruption, and the unforgivable sin of actively harboring and enabling a criminal operation right under the roof of the church. They had discovered that my parents had co-signed loans, using my stolen credit, making them fully complicit in Marcus's fraud. My father was stripped of his pastoral title, his generous church salary, and his prestigious parsonage housing. He was cast out of his own kingdom in absolute disgrace. Mama Denise suffered a fate far worse than financial ruin. She lost her crown. The African American community in that district was tight-knit, built on respect, faith, and mutual support. When the truth came out that the First Lady of the church had allowed her daughter to be financially abused and her grandchildren to be thrown away like trash, she became a total pariah. When she walked into the local grocery store, women she had known for 20 years would turn their backs and walk down a different aisle. When she tried to make an appointment at her upscale beauty salon, the receptionist coldly informed her that her business was no longer welcome. She was completely shunned, exiled to a life of utter social isolation and blistering public shame. The women who used to hang on her every word now whispered about her in disgusted, hushed tones. She was forced to live out the rest of her days as a ghost in a community that completely despised her. 6 months have passed since the heavy wooden doors of that courtroom swung shut, sealing the fates of the people who once thought they owned me. The chaotic, deafening noise that defined my entire existence has completely vanished. If you could see me right now, the lens would be slowly, deliberately pulling back. You would see me sitting in the center of my penthouse, framed by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that look out over the glittering electric expanse of the Atlanta skyline. The warm amber glow of the city lights reflects off the polished marble floors and the dark velvet of my armchair. I am wearing a simple, elegant silk slip dress swirling a glass of vintage Cabernet. There is no one shouting. There are no demands being made. There is only the sultry, rhythmic sound of a smooth jazz saxophone playing softly from the surround sound speakers, filling the vast, beautiful space with absolute peace. People often ask me about the children. They assume that because I surgically dismantled my brother and his wife, I must have coldly abandoned my nieces and nephew to the harsh realities of the system. They are entirely wrong. Helen Sterling, true to her uncompromising nature and her immense power within the state, personally oversaw their case. Maya Jamal and little Leo were not tossed into a random, overcrowded group home. They were placed together with a phenomenal, highly vetted, and deeply loving foster family. For the very first time in their lives, those kids are not being treated like fashionable props for social media or heavy burdens to be pawned off on relatives. They are in a quiet, stable home where they are allowed to just be children. They are attending a wonderful school, they are safe, and they are receiving the intensive therapy they need to process the profound betrayal their biological parents inflicted upon them. I do not visit them. I know that my physical presence would only drag the dark, heavy shadow of the Henderson family drama directly back into their fragile healing space. But I did exactly what a truly successful protector does. I quietly established a massive, ironclad anonymous trust fund for their future. My corporate attorneys manage it with incredibly strict instructions. Every single dollar of their future education, their healthcare, and their eventual transition into adulthood is completely guaranteed. And my lawyers made absolutely certain that Marcus and Chloe will never, under any circumstances, be able to touch a single cent of it. The kids are protected, and the generational curse of our family has been officially broken for them. I look directly at you now, looking right through the screen, because I need you to understand the absolute truth about what we are taught to believe. From the moment we take our first breath, society shoves a deeply toxic narrative down our throats. We are conditioned, especially within our communities and our churches, to believe that family is absolutely everything. We are brainwashed into thinking that shared DNA requires infinite loyalty, infinite sacrifice, and infinite forgiveness. We are told to pray for our abusers, to turn the other cheek, to keep the ugly family secrets safely locked inside the house, and to set ourselves on fire just to keep our relatives warm. But I learned a very different, much more brutal truth. They say blood is everything. But I learned that if blood is a poison, you cannot just pray over it and hope it miraculously turns into water. If blood is a poison, it will slowly, methodically kill you from the inside out. It will drain your ambition, crush your self-worth, and chain you to a life of miserable servitude. You have to be strong enough and ruthless enough to take a sharp scalpel and amputate that necrotic tissue to save your own life. Cutting off my parents and my brother was not a tragedy. It was a life-saving surgical procedure. I severed the infected limbs, and for the first time in 32 years, I was finally able to breathe. People often misunderstand the concept of revenge. They think revenge requires screaming matches in the street. They think it requires physical altercations, bitter online posts, or stooping down to the miserable level of the people who hurt you. They think you have to be consumed by anger and hatred to get even. But reacting with anger only proves that they still hold power over your emotions. The absolute undisputed pinnacle of revenge is none of those things. The ultimate revenge is total, unbothered silence. It is stepping completely out of their suffocating shadow, reclaiming your stolen identity, and building a breathtaking, brilliant life that those parasites are forever barred from entering. It is the realization that they are currently sitting in jail cells and disgraced, isolated living rooms, completely aware of the glorious empire you sit upon, knowing they will never be invited inside. As the camera of my life continues to slowly pull back, the frame widens. You see the sheer magnitude of the fortress I have built for myself. You see the expensive art, the pristine layout, the overwhelming, undeniable manifestation of a woman who fought her way out of the dark and claimed her rightful throne. I am 32 years old. I own my companies, I own my properties, and most importantly, I finally own myself. I do not flinch when my phone rings anymore. I do not shrink my posture to make insecure people feel tall. I sit here in my solitary, unapologetic wealth entirely alone and entirely complete. The smooth jazz saxophone rises slightly in the background, a warm melodic embrace that wraps around the quiet luxury of the room. The sparkling lights of the Atlanta skyline blur into a beautiful glowing mosaic as the view slowly widens further and further away. There is no sadness here. There is only victory. The screen slowly fades into a deep absolute black, leaving nothing behind but the lingering triumphant sound of a woman who finally set herself entirely free.